You have spent your whole life making other people's pain more bearable. You walked into rooms and immediately located the one person suffering. You listened for hours, gave everything you had, and rebuilt people with your bare hands. And when they finally healed, when they finally stood up straight and walked back into their lives, you watched them go. And you were still there, still in the same place, still carrying the same wound you began with. This is the wounded healer. And for most INFJs, this archetype does not just pass through their life, it becomes their life. Welcome to power and myth. The wounded healer is one of the oldest archetypes in human history. In Greek mythology, Chiron was a centaur of extraordinary wisdom. He trained heroes, he healed the sick, he taught medicine, music, and philosophy to those who would shape the ancient world. And he did all of this whilst carrying an arrow wound that would never close, a poison that could not be cured by the very arts he had mastered. The wound was permanent. The healing of others continued regardless. This is the paradox that defines the archetype. The deepest healers are healed last. In many stories, they are not healed at all. Jung understood this, and he understood why a particular kind of person returns to it again and again, not from weakness, but from something older and more structural than choice. For the INFJ, the wounded healer is not simply a phase, it is a gravitational field. You were drawn into it early, perhaps before you had language for what was happening. As a child, you read the emotional climate of a room before you read the faces of the people in it. You could sense the tension beneath a smile, the grief beneath a joke, the desperation beneath someone asking for very little, and because you could sense it, you felt responsible for it. This is the first step into the wounded healer's territory, the belief that perception creates obligation. If you can see it, you must address it. If you can feel it, it is yours to carry. What makes this a trap is not the compassion. The compassion is real, and it is profound, and it is in many ways your greatest gift. What makes it a trap is the inversion that happens quietly over time. The wounded healer begins as someone who helps from their wound. Their own pain has given them access to territory that others cannot navigate. They understand grief because they have lived in it. They understand betrayal because they have absorbed it. They understand the feeling of being unseen because that is the water they have always swum in. And this understanding is precisely what makes them so extraordinarily effective at holding space for others. But there is a shadow side to this gift that most INFJs will recognize in the back of their chest rather than in their conscious mind. At some point, the helping stops being an expression of abundance and becomes an expression of avoidance. At some point, the INFJ who is pouring themselves into everyone else's recovery is using that pouring as a reason not to attend to their own. Consider the pattern. You are exhausted. You are depleted. There is a grief you have been meaning to tend to, a wound you have been meaning to sit with, a version of yourself you have been meaning to become. And then someone needs you. And the relief you feel at being needed, the immediate redirection of energy outward, the sense of purpose that floods in when you are of use to someone. That relief is real. That is not weakness. That is the wounded healer architecture operating at full capacity. It was built this way. The archetype sustains itself by making helping feel like healing. Jung called this the healer's shadow, the use of others' suffering to avoid encountering one's own. This is not a flaw in your character. It is the precise mechanism by which the wounded healer perpetuates itself through the person who carries it. You are not selfish for noticing it. You are not broken for having lived inside it for years. But you must see it clearly before you can choose something else. There is a particular kind of INFJ exhaustion that does not come from overwork. It comes from this, from being so perpetually outward-facing that the inner world, the one that actually sustains everything you give, goes unattended. The well does not refill itself. And the INFJ who has been in the wounded healer archetype for a long time often does not know this, not because they are unintelligent, but because the archetype is generous with short-term rewards. People love you. People need you. People heal in your presence. The affirmation of being the one who helps is, for a personality that has often felt unseen and out of place, intoxicating. Not because you are vain, but because finally here, In this role, you make sense to the world. And that is the real trap, not the exhaustion, not the emotional labor. The real trap is that the wounded healer is often the first identity that makes an INFJ feel legible to others. Before this, you were too much, too sensitive, too intense, too concerned with things that no one else seemed to notice, too quiet and too overwhelming at the same time. But as the wounded healer, your depth has a function. Your sensitivity has an application. Your ability to sit with darkness is not strange here. It is necessary. And so the archetype becomes not just a role, but a home, the first one that ever felt like it fit. Leaving it feels like losing yourself. And this is why most INFJs never do. But here is what the Myth of Chiron actually offers if you read it to its end. Chiron's story does not close with perpetual suffering. It closes with transformation. Faced with immortality and an incurable wound, Chiron chose to surrender that immortality, to give it away to another, and in doing so he was placed among the stars. He was not healed by continuing to heal others. He was transformed by finally releasing what he could not carry forever. He moved from wound to constellation, from the archetype of the sufferer who serves to something else entirely. This is not a small thing. This is the invitation the wounded healer eventually makes to every INFJ who carries it long enough, not to abandon compassion, not to stop caring, but to allow the wound itself to be transformed, rather than endlessly transmuted into fuel for other people's healing. The question is not whether you are a healer. You are. The question is whether you have allowed your own healing to be part of that story, or whether you have quietly decided that your gift exempts you from being tended to. Whether you have concluded, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that you are the exception, that healers do not get to rest, that rest is for people whose depths are not this useful to others. You are not the exception. You are the one who needs this most. The movement beyond the wounded healer does not happen all at once. It begins with a single choice, repeated slowly over time, to turn the same quality of attention you give to others inward, not instead of giving it outward, but as well as, to treat your own wound with the same patience and reverence you would bring to someone you love, to ask yourself with genuine curiosity and without the guilt that usually arrives with the question, what would healing actually look like for me? Not for the person I am helping, not for the community I am sustaining, for me. This is the threshold the wounded healer must eventually cross. And crossing it does not diminish the archetype, it completes it. The most powerful healers in any mythological tradition were not those who remained perpetually in their wounds. They were those who descended into it, stayed long enough to know it fully, and returned with something that could not have been found any other way. Chiron became a constellation. The wounded healer, finally tended, becomes something older and larger, something that holds the wound as wisdom rather than obligation. Something in this video has named what you have been carrying in silence. I would like to know. Tell me in the comments which part of the wounded healer's pattern you have recognized in yourself, and whether you have ever felt the pull to cross that threshold. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring this territory. This is Power and Myth, where your depth is not too much, it is exactly enough. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.